Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is with us. Your run for the presidency has so far exposed challenges with state ballot access and inclusion in televised debates, with President Biden and President Trump set to meet for the first time to debate this month. What has to happen for you to be on that stage as well?
President Biden's campaign staffers, during their phone call with CNN, as reported by the Washington Post, said specifically that CNN needed to use criteria to determine who was going to be on the stage that would keep me off the stage, that he would not come to the debate as long as I was on the stage with him. And by the way, this is illegal. It's illegal under the Federal Elections Commission laws act. The act specifically says that the network can sponsor debates, but they need pre-existing criteria that are objective and neutral. CNN chose criteria that it thought would keep me off the stage. One of those criteria is that I have to be polling at 15 points or higher in at least 4 recent polls among 12 polling companies. The day after they published this criteria, we provided them with polls that fit their criteria. So and another poll came out that week. CNN's own poll is among those, which shows me at, I think, 16%. And the other criteria is that the candidates need to be on the ballot in sufficient states to gain 270 electoral votes. The problem that CNN has is that neither President Trump or President Biden is on any state ballot. They both have expectations that they're going to win the Democratic and Republican nominations, respectively. But that's not guaranteed. So they're not on the ballot anywhere. I'm the only one that's on the ballot anywhere. What the FEC says is if CNN colludes with those campaigns to exclude me, it's an illegal campaign contribution. And we filed a complaint with FEC to make sure they enforce that law.
Now, as far as exclusion goes, Ross Perot was excluded in 1996 in debates, though he participated in 1992 and even won close to 19% of the popular vote in 92. Is challenging with the Federal Election Commission any different today than it was for Perot in 96?
The system is far more politicized. It's much more difficult to get on the ballot today after Ross Perot and after Ralph Nader in 2001. The parties got together and agreed on criteria for qualifying for the ballot in each state. And they deliberately made the criteria so onerous that they believed that nobody would ever be able to qualify for it. They raised the number of signatures that we needed by, to over 1 million today.
What recourse is there actually? Is it just fines for networks, which media companies can well afford?
We are doing the impossible, essentially. Texas requires you to get over, I think, 113,000 signatures in 45 days. We came back with 250,000. So we are exceeding all of their metrics. In Hawaii, we got our own political party, the We the People Party. We got on the ballot in Hawaii in February. We got enough signatures to get on the ballot and get our party registered. The DNC then sued us to keep us off of the ballot. The Hawaii court came back after hearings and said the DNC had not met its burden, so we will be on the ballot in Hawaii. But we expect that kind of litigation in every state. The DNC has $3 billion, and their big strategy is to keep people from running against President Biden, using court cases against Donald Trump, using the courts to get me off the ballot. They apparently don't believe that their candidate can win in a fair fight.
So as far as ballot access, you faced a challenge here in the state of Hawaii by the Democratic Party. Your supporters, who I met, some of them, won that challenge without a lawyer. Can you bring us up to date on other states that you are facing like challenges? Is it one party more than the other? Is it the Democrats more than the Republicans, for example?
The Democrats are actively trying to keep us off the ballot in every state. Oh, the Republicans, President Trump has begun attacking me a lot. And actually, I draw a lot more voters from President Trump than President Biden. I get about 57% of our followers say that if I leave the race, that they're going to vote for President Trump. If President Biden runs against President Trump with me in the race, President Biden loses. If President Biden runs against President Trump with me out of the race, President Biden loses even worse. He loses 2 more states, Maine and Virginia. So President Biden cannot win no matter what. I can win. And what I propose to President Biden is that we do a spoiler agreement where we both do a poll, fund a poll together jointly in October. And whichever one of the 2 of us is doing worse against President Trump, that the other one will withdraw. And so far, President Biden has not agreed to that.
Can you tell me about some alternative media platforms and any interest? For example, we heard that maybe possibly X would host a debate. Has there been any movement in digital spaces?
Well, there's a lot of people who would like to host the debate. Elon Musk has offered to host it. We've accepted, and he would do it in conjunction with News Nation, which is another network. But, the problem is trying to get President Biden or President Trump to go to a debate with me, and I don't think either of them, in fact, both of them, have said they don't want to be on the stage with me.
Why do you think that is?
I think that they both feel comfortable debating each other because they keep it kind of on the culture war issues. They keep it on abortion and guns and the border. They never talk about, like, what are we going to do with the $34 trillion debt, which the 2 of them ran up. So they don't have an excuse. President Trump in 4 years spent more money, $8 trillion, more than every president in American history, from George Washington to George W. Bush, 283 years of history. President Biden is racing to catch him. He's adding $1 trillion to the debt every 90 days. And so neither of them want to talk about that. Neither of them want to talk about the addiction to wars, because both of them got us into Ukraine war and are supporting it. Neither of them want to talk about the chronic disease epidemic that now debilitates 60% of our kids, because both of them presided over it. Neither of them want to talk about the division, the polarization that is now more toxic in our country than at any time since the Civil War, because both of them feed on it. They encourage it. They tell their followers, you should hate the other guy because he's going to end the republic. And they're the products, their success, the products of keeping that division intact. Neither of them want to talk about the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that has really debilitated our government agencies, because both of them were, again, presided over it. And neither of them is able to talk about, the danger to our democracy and AI of these new technologies, of blockchain technologies, which they together have driven out of the country, and we need to bring them back in the country. But we have to make sure that we use AI to give the people power over their government, rather than it being used by the government and by corporations to enslave us. That is a delicate operation, but it's something we need to do, and it's something that I don't think President Biden or President Trump have ever thought about.
Last question. If you were included in a debate, how might you address the 2 most current news headlines regarding your opponent, starting with President Biden's executive action on the U.S. southern border? What would your stance be on that?
I mean, I've been urging him to close the border since I started this campaign, and talking about it. In one of the things that he did, which he said up until yesterday, he said it couldn't be done, which is to revivify the Migrant Protection Act, which keeps people in Mexico who have asylum claims, that who arrive from other countries into Mexico, that they have to stay in Mexico while that claim is being adjudicated. And that is very, very important, that we should change the catch and release program back to what it was before Biden came in, which was a catch and return program, and that we should complete the infrastructure and the personnel reforms on the border to shut it down. We need to shut it down. It ultimately is existential to our country. A country cannot survive without, unless we have borders that we control. We need to have immigration in this country. We need to have a compassionate immigration policy. We need, in my view, to have wide gates that make it easier to get a path to citizenship, to make it possible, very, very easy for small businesses in this country that need workers from abroad to get them. We need those workers to come in to make sure we keep our Social Security solvent. But illegal immigration is not a solution to anything, and it's not compassionate. I've spent too much time on the border watching the terrible, terrible ordeals that these immigrants go through at the hands of the drug cartels, the disappearance of 80,000 children. Then they come here and crush our social safety net in our cities, and it's not good for anybody.
And President Trump's court cases and convictions, how does that affect your race, and what is your opinion on how that has played out?
Well, the United States Constitution doesn't say that you can't get elected president if you're a convicted felon. I think this strategy of trying to get rid of President Trump using the courts is going to backfire on the DNC. And I said that at the outset. I think my worries about that are validated by the fact that he raised $200 million, most of it in small donations, within 24 hours of his conviction. I think it's going to harden it's going to pour concrete on the polarization in this country, and it's just not good for America in the long run. And there's too much indicia that this was a political prosecution, because the prosecutor in 2016 rejected this case and said it was not a good case. The federal prosecutors also rejected the case. The current DA ran on a promise that he would prosecute President Trump. And so it looks bad to a lot of Americans.
Any final words as far as where you see things going and where you would like them to go?
What I would say is, my favorability ratings are better than President Trump or President Biden. I'm beating both President Trump and President Biden among young people. I'm very competitive with Black Americans, with Indigenous people. I'm beating them very badly, and with Hispanics. So I think if people vote for a candidate out of hope, out of inspiration that I'm going to win the race, if they vote out of fear, then President Biden or President Trump will win. And I have 5 months to convince the American public that they can afford to vote out of hope other than out of fear.
Thank you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
To discuss this and a whole lot of other issues, including his fight to get on the ballot around the country, we welcome Robert F. Kennedy Jr., independent presidential candidate, back to the program. Thanks so much for coming on again. We appreciate it. Before I ask you about your ballot fights, let me ask you about Israel. A lot of pro-Palestinian advocates have been condemning Israel over this rescue operation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment, and it's the height of irony that Israel is being blamed for civilian deaths in recovering its hostages when Hamas is stashing those hostages in so-called civilian houses in the middle of a crowded marketplace, and then opens fire on the Israel rescuers and prompting them to return it. It's like if a bank robber takes a hostage in the middle of a bank robbery and holds the hostage in one arm and is firing over the head of the hostage at the police, and the police return fire, the hostage gets killed. The law and public reaction will not blame the police. It's going to blame the hostage taker. And unfortunately, as you show, the international press, the global press, acts credulously to every pronouncement by by Hamas and with fierce skepticism towards anything, and ridicule and derision and contempt towards anything that Israel does or says. Israel cannot win in this kind of, and by the way, I'm not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu or the Likud. Neither are most Israelis. But, Israel has a unity government now. It is united in the need to disarm Hamas before there's any ceasefire. And the world is demanding a ceasefire. If we did that, it just rewards terrorism. And it tells Hamas, do it again and again and again. Just keep grabbing hostages, and you'll get rewarded for it every time. And it's sad. It's terrible for innocent people in Gaza. But the finger should be pointed at Hamas and not at Israel.
Let me ask you, we saw a wave of campus protests at colleges across the country. Your poll numbers with young voters have been very strong. Do you condemn the universities for sending in the police when students set up encampments or take over buildings?
Well, I'm a very, very strong advocate of free speech. I think as long as protests are peaceful, if they don't obstruct other students from going to class, if they don't interfere with the rights of other students, if they don't destroy property, that they ought to be able to protest. But some of these protests were, and particularly on the private campuses that are regulating speech, there's different rules for government campuses than private. Many of the private campuses routinely limit speech in other contexts. To protect maybe other races or other minority groups. And in that case, they need to exercise that same care in protecting the rights of Jewish students.
And so you're not opposed to, again, when the buildings were being taken over, the permanent encampments, et cetera. I'm not talking about just people protesting when they asked the police to come in.
No, if you're interfering with private property, if you're breaking into buildings, those are illegal acts, and I think it's appropriate to have a police respond. If it's just speech, and it's legal speech, permitted speech, meaning the place and the time and the methodology is legal, not the speech itself. All speech, in my view, should be legal, but that should be legal. But once you start invading buildings, stopping other kids from accessing their rights to graduation, to attend classes, then I think it's appropriate to have a police response.
Let's talk about your quest to get on the ballots. Look, it's not your fault that there is this arcane system in place around the country that makes it so hard for an independent candidate to get on the ballots, but it is the reality of where we are. Is there any real chance that you're going to be on close to 50 states' ballots by the time of the election?
Yeah, I will be on all 50 states by mid-July. So I'm already, as of June 20th, I think I'll be on enough ballots to get on 348 electoral votes. We already are on. We're on 9 state ballots. We already have enough signatures for another 10. Dan, we're not filing our signatures immediately because, for strategic reasons, we're going to hold them to the end because the DNC then calls up everybody on the signature list and tries to, get them to cancel their signatures. So we have to get 3 or 4 times what the state requires in order to protect ourselves. New York requires 46,000 signatures in 45 days. We got 137,000. Texas required, these are the 2 hardest states. Texas requires 113,000. We got 250,000. But we're already halfway there. And in terms of electoral votes, we're on the hardest states already: Florida, New York, Texas, and California. Those are the ones everybody said we could not get. The other states are all pretty easy, and we will definitely have them by mid-July. So I will be on the ballot in 50 states. Despite all the efforts to keep me off, we're going to be on it, and there's no doubt about it.
Let me ask you about something that you had said that ended up leading to a bit of controversy. You'd said there's an argument that President Biden is a greater threat to democracy than Donald Trump. You stand by that?
Well, what I said is I could argue it, and let me tell you why. I think, people clearly, President Trump made an effort to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, which is one of it's one of the most fundamental features of American democracy. So that is a threat to democracy. I think what President Biden did, you could argue, is much more threatening, which is the attack on the Constitution, and particularly the First Amendment freedom of expression. President Biden was actively open a portal for the federal agencies to censor the speech of his political critics. The portal, and this, we know this because of the Twitter files, but also because of my lawsuit, Biden versus Kennedy, and the lawsuit that was brought by the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana, Murphy versus Kennedy, or Murphy versus Biden. The discovery in those lawsuits showed that 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution, President Biden began censoring his political opponents. There were White House officials who were on emails, which we now have those emails thanks to these lawsuits, with Facebook, with Twitter, with YouTube, with Instagram, telling those social media sites to remove posts by his political critics. The White House forced them to open a portal, which they gave the FBI to manage, but there were many, many agencies that had access to this portal: the CIA, the FBI, CISA, NIH, DHS, the IRS, CDC, FDA, many, many other agencies, and were able to go in there and censor political speech. So, and you can say, Dan, I know, you look at President Biden, you say, oh, he's a nice old man. He would not abuse that kind of power. Once you set the precedent for violating freedom of speech, all of the other constitutional rights are now in jeopardy. And I would say that is probably, the next guy in office, which could be President Trump, is highly likely to abuse that in a much more serious way now that the president has been created. So that's why I said I can make a very strong argument at the larger threat, because nobody cared about it. The media was CNN and MSNBC, 24 hours a day, were talking about what happened on January 6th. You could not find a media report talking about what President Biden was doing, setting this precedent that it's okay for the White House to censor the social media sites, to censor the political. And by the way,
were they censoring, or were they requesting that what they viewed as dangerous content, and they were advising them, giving them information, et cetera, which you can agree or disagree with? But my understanding is they weren't actually using the government to censor it. They were talking to these social media entities about certain content that they viewed as dangerous. Is that not a fair characterization?
That would be a very charitable and mild characterization of what they were doing. They were actually threatening them that if you don't do this, we are going to, withdraw your Section 230 immunity, which is existential for those companies. So those companies felt they were being forced to do this. And you can read the correspondence, which we also now have between, for example, Mark Zuckerberg and his staff, in which they were saying this, what the White House is doing is very corrupt, it's very cynical, but we need to do it because they have so much power over us. My Instagram account, with almost 1 million followers, was removed. I had no misinformation on there. They could not point to one Instagram post that I'd ever made that was factually erroneous. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to government databases.
They would say it was about the vaccine issues, but I don't want to go down that route.
But it was also other. It was Ukraine war. It was all kind. It began with the COVID countermeasures, with the lockdowns, with the masks, which we should be able to talk about, by the way.
Yep.
Even if somebody considers it dangerous, it's not the job of the press in this country to manipulate information. It's the job to tell the truth, and we ought to be able to have these debates on every subject.
That I agree. Yep. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gets the final word. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the program. We appreciate it. We look forward to having you back.
Dad, thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
Throw you the breaking news here. Really interesting, because we know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had filed a complaint with the FEC after he heard that he would not be included in this debate, saying, hey, that is not fair. Even though many saying, well, he's not really a presumptive candidate, the FEC saying that doesn't matter. That's not in the legal language. How could this throw a wrench in the plans of the other two candidates?
Well, I think we've seen the Democrats do things like this before. They tend to get what they want. So, you know, they didn't want Biden to be the nominee back in for the 2020 race. They the people wanted the communists, what's his name, Bernie Sanders. They wanted him. And so we see Democrats kind of going around and getting what they want anyway. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they, unless they actually legally have to do it, that they actually do it. Otherwise, I think they will press forward with whatever they want.
You think CNN will not include RFK Jr.?
If they can get away with it, if it's not legal.
Well,
yeah.
So according to the FEC, Katrina, they have said they would be breaking the law.
They would be breaking, exactly, campaign finance laws, exactly. So, I mean, they're going to have to do it all. I mean, CNN's not going to want to be slapped with a massive fine, right?
I think we're going to see some developments here with this. This is very interesting.
This is a big deal, yes.
Imagine Trump do his own thing. Then you have RFK, obviously very spry, and then you have President Biden. There's questions of his physical ability to compete with two figures like that on a debate stage and open mics. That would be, to me, that would be must-see TV, just like American Agenda.
Yes, and I like the comparison. Second to American Agenda.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that RFK Jr. brings something to the table. I think he offers the American people a reminder of what the Democrats once stood for. Anti-war, anti-censorship, anti-vaccine mandates. I think it's something that I think will pull away Democrats more than they will pull away Republicans, and I think it will hurt Joe Biden in the general election.
And it's interesting, I want to follow up on that too. Just what the FEC is saying, they were saying that every member of CNN who is participating in planning, executing, and holding this debate is at risk of prosecution, like Michael Cohen was, because he violated campaign finance laws. So again, a very acute risk if RFK Jr. isn't in there. You know, and Keisha, again, talking about the optics that Bob referenced, we know that RFK Jr. is certainly very physically fit. We know he's outspoken. We also know he's a really intelligent guy. We know former President Trump, of course, can handle anything, can handle any question. He does it his own way. We know that President Biden is extremely compromised without note cards. The optics can't be good for the Democrats. I wonder if they're shaking in their boots right now.
They've got to be. You know, there's a lot coming at them with Trump just constantly building more and more support. Every time they go after him, he just raises more money. He just gains more momentum. So they've got to be shaking in the boots. And then now with RFK, he has his own, coalition that he's building of people that support him. And so they. The country. They're willing to literally tear down our country just so they can win. I mean, these people will stop at nothing. So I think they are shaking in their boots, and I think their actions prove that.
Jason, do you think that this is a real possibility? No, I guess
it kind of has to be. I mean, I think it's kind of a done deal, right?
And I'm with Katrina on this. Just it's the optics. It is the optics.
Just think
of
of
having
the three
Joe
of them
Biden
on stage
having to compete with two guys at the top of their game.
Yeah.
I think it would be very difficult. I'm interested to see what happens here.
I think the contrast that you're going to see on the debate stage, if he is up there, I think that you're going to see two very capable, mentally acutive people, and you're going to have Joe Biden, who he's shaking hands with thin air. He falls off bicycles. He can't find it. He's squatting where there's no seat. And I think it's going to be very visible to the American people that there's this dead man walking, running for president, and there's two very capable choices that they have.
It's also difficult.